from the implementation of the ceasefire agreement in June 1973 through May of 1974, about 15 months, I spent all this time there in Chau Doc and along the Cambodian border. I had a number of different experiences and adventures, but nothing compares to a day in June 1973 when my fiancé, Nuy Quinn, and I drove outside Chau Doc to climb up Sam Mountain and to spend a Saturday sort of taking in the sights. At Chau Doc and in South Vietnam and across the border into Cambodia were a range of mountains, 7 mountains, as they were called in Vietnamese, Thất Sơn or Bai Nui, both meaning 7 mountains area. The mountains were considered mystical, magical places, and it was beautiful scenery. And one of the smaller ones, this Sam Mountain or Nuy Sam, was nearby. You could get to, it was safe, and you could go to the top and have a beautiful view. There were also several interesting pagodas down at the base. So we drove out there and kind of in mid-morning, climbed up to the top, and there we're standing on top, this little small pagoda, and I look out across Cambodia, and you could see maybe 15 or 20 miles into Cambodia, and you had a breadth of vision that covered 3 different Cambodian provinces. And I was stunned by what I saw, because in every direction I looked, in all 3 provinces, there were plumes of smoke rising up out of the rice paddies. These beautiful verdant green swath of territory, and everywhere you looked, everywhere where there would be a village. Cambodian lived in cluster villages. All the houses would be built in a circle. They were all on fire with smoke coming up out of them. I had never seen anything like it before. Farmers did burn off their fields in Vietnam and Cambodia as a way to get rid of crop residue and provide a little fertilizer to the soil, but that usually produced a small amount, and it was a more diffuse smoke, like a cloud. These were like oil wells on fire, thin plumes of dark black smoke rising up everywhere. There must have been 40 or 50 of them. I couldn't figure out what it could be, and was scratching my head as we went back to Chau Doc and probably went out to dinner. But over the next several days, refugees start pouring out of Cambodia across the border and into Vietnam and settling along the Vinh Tay Canal just inside Vietnam. And soon there were 25, 30,000 of them. What could have caused this? So I go out, I find a few who can speak in Vietnamese. Eventually I get an interpreter who can work in Cambodian, and I'm asking questions everywhere. Finally, I find one individual who was very knowledgeable. He had been serving as a village chief, and I spent several days talking with him. And the picture that emerged was that on that day in June, I wish I could remember the date, but on a Saturday in June 1973, the young Cambodian revolutionaries who had been sort of Boy Scout revolutionaries, treating people so politely, never doing anything to offend, overnight turned into harsh, radical revolutionaries. And on that day, in every village, they suddenly identified themselves as part of this new organization. It was called Angka, the organization. And they forced everybody at gunpoint, every person who lived in every village to just stand up and march out of the village into the jungle, into the countryside, and were taken out to these jungle areas and forced to build new structures in which they would live, primitive structures, where they would be organized as labor battalions, and to ensure that they could never go back to their homes, that this new transformation was going to be irreversible. They burned down every house, everyone's possessions, every village burned to the ground. This was the beginning of a new era, of a new, incredibly radical transformation of the Cambodian countryside, taking place for the first time there in southwest Cambodia. It would become the focal point for the rest of my tour in Chau Doc until May of 1974, and which would consume me about learning as much as I could about what happened and reporting on it. It actually becomes several stories. But it was that day that I witnessed the birth of the Khmer Rouge, as they were called in the Cambodian language, Khmer Rouge, red Khmers, red Cambodians. And the Khmer Rouge, the Khmer Rouge, would be the most radical, genocidal, terrorist organization of the second half of the 20th century.